What happens when Hollywood's most outspoken actor walks into what he thinks is a friendly, late-night interview, only to discover the host has a completely different agenda? Tonight, we're diving deep into one of the most explosive celebrity confrontations ever caught on camera. And trust me, you won't believe how this whole thing unfolded. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because this story gets wilder by the minute. The atmosphere in the studio that evening felt different from the moment. Late-night shows buzz with that familiar energy. You know, the pre-show excitement, where everyone's cracking jokes and the mood is light? But something was off tonight. The production assistant seemed more tense than usual, whispering in hushed tones near the craft services table. Even the makeup artist, who'd worked with Mark on previous appearances, seemed unusually quiet as she touched up his face powder. Mark had been promoting his latest action thriller, a film where he played a decorated veteran turned private investigator. The movie had been getting solid reviews, and he was genuinely excited to talk about the intense preparation he'd put into the role. He'd spent months training with real former military personnel, learning tactical skills and diving deep into the psychological aspects of his character. This wasn't just another paycheck movie for him. It was personal. His own family had a strong military background, and he wanted to honor that legacy through his performance. As he sat in the green leather chair across from the host, the familiar late-night talk show setup felt comfortable enough. The audience was warm, giving him that standard enthusiastic welcome applause. The host flashed his trademark grin, the same one that had charmed millions of viewers for years. But Mark, who'd been doing interviews for decades, had developed a sixth sense about these things. Something in the host's eyes didn't match the smile on his face. The first few minutes went exactly as expected. Standard softball questions about the movie, some light banter about Mark's workout routine, a funny story about a mishap on set involving a stunt double and a particularly stubborn camel. The audience laughed in all the right places, and Mark felt himself settling into that familiar interview rhythm. He'd done this dance thousands of times before with countless hosts. His smile became slightly more forced, his posture a bit more rigid. Mark noticed the change immediately, but figured maybe the host was just trying to transition into more serious territory. That happened sometimes when interviewers wanted to show their range, moving from entertainment fluff to weightier topics. So Mark, the host said, leaning forward with what appeared to be genuine curiosity, "Your new movie deals with some pretty heavy themes about military service and the challenges veterans face when they return home. That's obviously a topic that's very close to your heart, given your family's background." Mark nodded, grateful for what seemed like an opportunity to discuss something meaningful. "Absolutely, it really is. My father served, my uncle served, and I've always had tremendous respect for the men and women who put their lives on the line for this country." The host nodded along, but Mark caught something in his expression that made him pause. There was a calculation there, like a chess player setting up pieces for a move several turns ahead. The studio lights felt slightly hotter than usual, and Mark could sense the energy in the room beginning to shift. "That's interesting," the host continued, his voice taking on a tone that was still conversational, but carried an undertone that hadn't been there moments before. "Because I have to ask, and I think a lot of people would be curious about this. How do you reconcile that deep respect for military service with some of the choices you've made in your career and your personal life?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Mark felt his shoulders tense slightly, but he kept his expression neutral. He'd been in this business long enough to recognize when an interview was about to take a turn, and his instincts were telling him to be very careful. About his next words, "I'm not sure I follow what you're getting at," Mark replied evenly, though internally he was already running through possible directions this conversation might go. See, they'd rattled you, but he could feel his pulse quickening just a bit. The host's smile widened, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Well, I mean, you've built this image as someone who champions working-class values and military honor. But at the same time, you've made some pretty questionable choices about the projects you've attached your name to. Don't you think there's a bit of a contradiction there?" And there it was. Mark could feel the trap closing around him, but he still wasn't entirely sure what the host was driving at. The audience had gone quieter, sensing the shift in tone, even if they couldn't quite put their finger on what was happening. This wasn't the usual playful back and forth they'd come to expect from late-night television. Mark kept his voice steady, but but anyone who knew him well would have recognized the slight edge that crept in when he felt like he was being backed into a corner. I think I've been pretty consistent in my choices over the years. I try to take on projects that challenge me as an actor and that tell stories worth telling. I'm not perfect, but I've always tried to be authentic about who I am and what I believe in. The host chuckled, but it was a sound completely devoid of warmth. Authentic. That's an interesting word choice. Because I've been looking at some of your recent interviews, and I have to say, there seem to be some pretty significant inconsistencies in the things you've said about various topics. Mark's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, not going in the direction he'd expected when he'd agreed to come on the show. Usually, these late-night appearances were controlled environments where both the host and the guest had... But something else was happening here, and Mark was starting to realize that he might have walked into an ambush. The camera operators had moved in slightly closer. Watching the interaction with intense focus, this wasn't accidental. Whatever was happening here had been planned, and Mark was beginning to understand that he was the target. "Let me be more specific," the host continued, clearly enjoying the discomfort he was creating. "Just last month, you gave an interview where you talked about the importance of family values and staying grounded. But wasn't it just 2 years ago that you were caught up in that whole controversy with the charity event where the money supposedly went missing? How do you explain that to your fans who look up to you as some kind of moral compass?" Mark's eyes flashed with anger, but he kept his voice controlled. "First of all, that charity situation was completely investigated and cleared up. There were accounting errors that had nothing to do with me personally, and every penny was accounted for. The fact that you're bringing up something that was thoroughly debunked shows me exactly what kind of conversation you're trying to have here." The audience was now completely silent, the tension in the room thick enough to cut with a knife. This had gone way beyond the usual celebrity interview territory, and had entered something much more personal and hostile. Mark could see people in the audience exchanging glances, clearly uncomfortable with what they were witnessing. The host leaned back in his chair with a satisfied smirk. "Oh, so now I'm the bad guy for asking legitimate questions? I thought you were all about transparency and accountability. There's a difference between asking legitimate questions and trying to create drama where none exists." Mark shot back, his Boston accent becoming more pronounced as his irritation grew. "You invited me here to talk about my work, and instead, my agenda is to give my audience the truth instead of the carefully crafted image your publicists want everyone to see. You come on these shows and you play this humble, working-class hero character." Mark stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the studio floor. The sudden movement caused several security personnel to shift nervously near the edges of the set. "You know what? I don't have to sit here and listen to this garbage." "Sit down, Mark," the host said with mock concern, gesturing theatrically to the audience. "Just having a conversation here, unless you have something to hide. I mean, if everything you're saying is true, then why are you getting so defensive?" "Defensive?" Mark's voice rose slightly, though he was still maintaining more control than most people would have in his situation. "I'm not defensive. I'm disgusted. This isn't journalism. This isn't entertainment." The host's producer had moved closer to the stage, and Mark noticed that additional security personnel had appeared near the exits. "Let me ask you this," the host continued, clearly relishing the confrontation. "How do you think your military family members feel about you playing dress-up as a soldier for millions of dollars, while real veterans are struggling to get basic health care and housing? Doesn't that strike you as a little bit obscene?" That was the line too far. Mark's entire demeanor changed, his jaw setting in a way that anyone who'd known him for more than 5 minutes would recognize as a warning sign. "Don't you dare try to use my family's service record as ammunition for whatever sick game you're playing here. Those men and women served their country with honor," the host said, pulling out a stack of papers that had clearly been prepared in advance. "Because I have some interesting information here about exactly how much of your income actually goes to veteran charities versus how much goes to your various business ventures and real estate investments." Mark's hands clenched into fists at his sides. "You want to talk about my charitable giving? Fine. I've donated millions of dollars to veteran organizations over the years. But apparently, that's not enough for people like you who are more interested in tearing people down than actually helping anyone. According to these documents, which were obtained through perfectly legal means, Your actual charitable donations represent less than 2% of your annual income. That's pretty modest for someone who talks such a big game about supporting the troops. Time I spend, the personal appearances I make. The behind-the-scenes work I do that never gets reported because the audience was now visibly uncomfortable, with several people looking toward the exits as if they were considering leaving. This had gone so far beyond normal late night. Time and appearances. How generous, the host said, with dripping sarcasm. I'm sure the homeless veterans really appreciate your thoughts and prayers, but let's talk about something else. Your new movie, the one you're here to promote. How much? Are you getting paid for that? Because I have to imagine it's significantly more than most veterans will see in their entire lifetimes. Mark took a step toward the host's desk, causing security to tense up visibly. You know what your problem is? Out there trying to make a difference. Fine. But at least I'm using my success to create jobs for hundreds of people and to tell stories that matter to me. The host's eyes lit up with malicious glee. Oh, we're getting personal now? That's interesting. Done real consequences? To make the world a little bit better. The host's mask had completely slipped now, revealing something genuinely ugly underneath. Manufactured outrage. That's rich coming from someone whose entire public persona is manufactured by a team of image consultants. You want to know what? I contribute. I hold people accountable. I ask the questions that your fluff piece interviewers are too scared to ask. Accountable for what, exactly? Mark demanded, his voice rising to match the host's energy for working hard, for supporting my family, for trying to make movies that people actually want to see. Or are we just throwing around accusations now and hoping something sticks? The host stood up from behind his desk, matching Mark's aggressive posture. How about we start with the fact that you've spent the last 20 years pretending to be some kind of everyman hero while you've been living in mansions and flying around in private jets? How about the fact that you lecture people about values while you've made millions glorifying violence in your movies? Violence in movies? Mark laughed, but there was no humor in it. Are you seriously going to lecture me about movie violence? While you spend every night on this show making jokes about real-world tragedies and political disasters, at least when I portray violence, it's fictional, and it serves a purpose in telling a story. The tension in the studio had reached a breaking point. Several audience members had actually gotten up and left, and the remaining crowd was watching with the kind of horrified fascination usually reserved for car accidents. The cameras were still rolling, capturing every moment of what was rapidly becoming one of the most explosive television confrontations in recent memory. Fictional violence with real-world consequences, the host shot back. How many kids have tried to emulate the characters you play? How many people have been influenced by the toxic masculinity you promote in every single role you take? That accusation hit Mark like a physical blow. Toxic masculinity? Are you out of your mind? I've spent my entire career trying to portray complex characters who struggle with real problems and find ways to overcome them. If you think that's toxic, then you clearly haven't been paying attention to anything I've actually done. The host sensed he'd struck a nerve and pressed his advantage. Complex characters? You mean the same basic angry guy template you've been recycling for 2 decades. The only thing that changes is the setting and the size of the explosions. Mark's face was now flushed with genuine anger. You know what? I'm done. I came here to talk about a project that means something to me, and you've turned this into a character assassination based on nothing but your own bitter cynicism. I don't have to stand here and listen to this garbage from someone who's never created anything of value in his entire career. Oh, we're not done yet, the host said, his voice taking on a threatening tone. Security, make sure our guest doesn't leave until we've finished our conversation. The audience gasped audibly as several security guards moved to block the exits. Mark looked around the studio with disbelief, realizing that what had started as an ambush interview had now crossed into something much more sinister. Are you seriously trying to hold me here against my will? Mark asked, his voice deadly quiet. Because if that's what's happening here, then we've moved way beyond the realm of television entertainment. The host's smile was now completely predatory. You agreed to be here for the full segment when you signed your appearance contract. We still have 12 minutes left, and I have a few more questions I'd like to ask. Mark looked directly into the camera, addressing the audience at home rather than the hostile host. Let me be very clear about what's happening here. I was invited to appear on this show to discuss my new film, and instead, I've been subjected to a coordinated attack based on false information and personal animosity. This isn't journalism, this isn't entertainment, this is just cruelty for the sake of ratings. The host's producer had moved onto the stage now, whispering urgently in the host's ear. Mark could see the calculation happening in real time as the show's team realized they might have pushed things too far. "Mr. Wahlberg," the producer said, stepping forward with his hands raised in a gesture that was supposed to be calming. "Why? Don't we just take a quick break and reset? I think there might have been some miscommunication about the direction of tonight's interview." Mark looked at the producer with undisguised contempt. "Miscommunication? Your host has spent the last 20 minutes attacking my character, my family, my career, and my charitable work based on what appears to be completely fabricated information. That's not miscommunication. That's malicious intent." The host, realizing that his producer was trying to salvage the situation, doubled down instead. "There's no miscommunication here. I'm asking legitimate questions that the public deserves to have answered. If Mr. Wahlberg can't handle a little scrutiny, then maybe he shouldn't be in the public eye." That was the final straw. Mark walked directly to the host's desk and leaned over it, bringing his face close to the host's. "You want to know what I can't handle? I can't handle people who hide behind the pretense of journalism while they're really just trying to destroy people for their own entertainment. You're not a journalist, you're not an entertainer, you're just a bully with a television show." The host recoiled slightly, but tried to maintain his aggressive posture. "Are you threatening me on national television?" "I'm not threatening anybody," Mark replied, his voice calm but filled with unmistakable menace. "I'm just telling you exactly what I think of you and what you do for a living. And what I think is that you're a coward who attacks people from behind the safety of your desk because you know you could never face any of them on equal terms." The studio had gone completely silent, except for the hum of the cameras and the sound of Mark's voice. Even the host seemed to realize that he had pushed things beyond the point of no return. Mark straightened up and looked around the studio one more time. "You know what the real tragedy is here? There are probably people watching this at home who are going to eat this up, who are going to enjoy watching someone get torn down for no reason other than the fact that they're successful, and that says something really sad about where we are as a society." With that, he walked directly toward the exit, ignoring the security guards who stepped aside rather than physically confront him. Just before he reached the door, he turned back to face the camera one final time. "To anyone watching this who actually cares about the truth, I'll be releasing a complete statement tomorrow morning with documentation of everything this man has accused me of tonight. And I think you'll find that the reality is very different from the narrative he's trying to create." The host, desperate to regain control of the situation, called out after him. "Running away doesn't make you look innocent, Mark." Mark paused at the door and turned back with a smile that was both sad and dangerous. "I'm not running from anything. I'm just refusing to participate in your circus anymore. There's a difference." And with that, he walked out, leaving behind a studio full of shocked audience members, panicked producers, and one host who was beginning to realize that his ambush had backfired spectacularly. The cameras kept rolling as the host tried to salvage the situation, but the damage was already done. What was supposed to be a triumphant takedown had instead revealed the host's true character to millions of viewers, and the internet was already beginning to explode with reactions to what they had just witnessed. Make sure to subscribe to the channel for more incredible stories like this one, and drop a comment below telling us what you think really motivated the host to orchestrate such a vicious attack. Was it jealousy, ratings, desperation, or something even more personal?